So imagine this TheraBand is your spine. Now when we place load on it, such as deadlifting, squatting, or lifting overhead, the spine deforms, and this deformity can cause injury. However, when we properly brace and then apply the load, the spine no longer deforms. This is how the core works. What's up, my name is Dr. Alex Straley, and this is the first part of a 5-part series all about the core. In this first video, I'm going to be talking about what the core is and why it's important to train it. This will be the most science fact heavy video out of the whole series, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about the core. I want to ask you right now, think of how many core muscles you can think of. I'll give you 5 seconds, pause if you need more time. How many did you get? Let me know down in the comments how many muscles you could think that belong to the core. In this video, we're going to talk about over 20 different muscles. Did you get that? So these videos not only focus on things in the gym, but also things you do in your daily lives. Take a look at this video. I bet you thought that was deadlifting the bar, but no, it's a laundry basket. If this is the safest and strongest way to deadlift a bar or heavy weights, then it's surely going to be the safest way to pick up a laundry basket or your kids or a heavy box or whatever you're lifting. The techniques that we do in the gym should be the same as what we do in our daily lives. So what is the core? In general, it allows you to bend your torso in which way, but it also stabilizes so your torso doesn't move. When I lift my arm, I want my torso to stay stable. I don't want it to also have to move as well. When we look at Newton's third law with equal and opposite actions and reactions, when I lift something up, such as an overhead press or putting a bowl up top, that same force is coming down on me, and I need a strong, stable core to keep my body where it is. Because if my core is extremely weak, as I pushed up, my body would crumble. And like I mentioned, if we're going to move our arms or legs, we need our core to be stable because its proximal stability or stability close to the body allows distal mobility. Imagine you were fishing with a very wimpy fishing rod and you had a big fish on there. That rod's going to be bouncing up and down. It's going to be very hard to reel in that fish. Now imagine that rod is a piece of iron. It's going to be easy to move the fish as you need because that proximal stability is there to allow for that distal mobility. So let's start diving into these muscles. Now these first few are ones you might have thought of. We have the rectus abdominis. Now the rectus abdominis goes from the pubic bone up to the costal cartilage of ribs 5 through 7 and the xiphoid process of the sternum, which is that bone in the middle of your chest. This is also known as the six-pack muscle. And while the rectus has its job, it's only one of many core muscles, so we gotta make sure we're working all the other ones. Now the rectus does help bend your torso forward like a crunch, but it also helps from leaning back. Let's say that you're sitting on a stool and you didn't have a rectus abdominis. You would very quickly just lean all the way back and you'd fall over because you don't have this anterior or front side core keeping you together. So let's look at the external obliques. It starts up by the ribs and you can picture just by putting your hands here. It goes down and in, connects to the linea alba, which is right in the middle of your stomach, as well as onto your hips. Now the internal oblique runs perpendicular. It starts at the hips and goes up to the bottom few ribs. Now in the front, we also have what's called a transverse abdominis, which starts at the ribs and the hips and runs inwards. So just looking at these 4 muscles, we have the transverse abdominis which runs this way, external oblique, internal oblique, and then rectus abdominis which runs up and down. These different fiber orientations not only allow for different movements, but also have different stability demands. Now the last muscle of this group is called pyramidalis. Now I probably said that wrong, but it is what it is. This is located down in the hips and helps to tighten the linea alba, which is what a lot of these other different muscles connect to. So it helps you bring everything together. Now all these together are considered your anterior and your anterolateral core. In this second video, I'll show you how to assess this specific group. Before we get into the next group of muscles, if you've liked what you've seen so far, make sure to go down below and hit that like button. That tells YouTube that this video is worth a dang and it'll show it to more people. So I really appreciate that. Now these second group of muscles, while they're popular muscles and a lot of people know about them, you may not realize they're also core muscles. Let's take a look at the latissimus dorsi. Now fun fact, this is the widest muscle in the body. The lats do a lot for the shoulder blade and for the arm, but right now we're looking at it as a spinal stabilizer. Now it originates from the spinous process of T7 to T12, which in layman's term, that's a little bony part that you feel sticking out of your spine. So it's in the lower half of the middle third of your back. Now it also has attachments in the bottom 4 ribs, the inferior angle of scapula, which is the bottom of the shoulder blade, as well as the thoracolumbar fascia. A little sidebar of what is fascia. When you get fried chicken, there's that little film between the friedness and the chicken. That's the fascia. So fascia wraps every organ and muscle in the body. And we have this large group of fascia in the back, the thoracolumbar, thoracic, lumbar, so middle and low back. So essentially the latissimus dorsi covers at least 2/3 of your back. And so it's very important to make sure this muscle is strong and that you're activating it when you're trying to produce a strong core. Going down a little bit, we have the glute max, the glute med, and the glute min. Now the glute max is your booty muscle, and that's a really strong hip extensor. I talked about this in another video, so go ahead and hit this link up here so you can watch it after this one. Now the glute med is a little muscle on the side of our hip, and this plays a very important role for stabilizing our pelvis. If you ever see someone walking and their pelvis or the hips are bouncing up and down as they step, they probably have a weak glute med and it's not stabilizing on the other side. So glute med actually works in opposite. So if you have a left hip drop, or if your left hip drops as you're walking, that means your right glute med is not working. If this is our pelvis, the right glute med is going to pull it up to keep the left up. If it's not working, the left side is going to drop. Then we also have the glute min, which is going to help the glute med do its job. It gets overlooked quite a bit, but it's still there. So with these glute muscles, if they're not working, you're going to have a lot of extra motion in your hips, which is going to produce more motion in your back, which can very well cause back pain. And if your glute max is not working to help extend your hips, which also brings your torso up, you're going to use other muscles, which will then put more force onto your back, which again can cause back pain. So it's really important to build up that glute max so it'll stabilize your back. So another muscle we're going to look at is the psoas major. This sticks off the bottom of your spine and comes down into your leg. Sometimes when people talk about tight hip flexors, this may be what they're referring to. If this muscle is really tight, your back is going to become more lordotic, which is just a fancy way of saying hyperextended, which is just a fancy way of saying that your back is going to have a bigger arch to it. Now when this happens, the forces through your spine can shift, and so you're putting force onto a spot that's not supposed to take it, which can then lead to injury. We also have the psoas minor, which sits above the psoas major. And another fun fact, not everybody has this muscle. So another one we're going to talk about is the quadratus lumborum. Now this sits in your low back, and it goes from the hips to the lateral part of your lumbar spine, or your transverse process. Now this muscle is very important for walking as it helps flex the hip. Dr. Stuart McGill will often reference this muscle when he's talking about the importance of core. And he'll note that if you see someone with a spastic or paralyzed QL, they're unable to walk because they can't flex their hip at all. In the 4th video of this series, I'll be talking about a really good exercise to make sure you have a strong QL. Before I cover these last few muscles, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content just like this. And that little notification bell, hit that too so you know when the next part of the series is uploaded. Now let's go back to the back. There are 4 different levels of back muscles: the superficial, the intermediate, the deep, and the deepest. The superficial level contains the splenius muscle. The intermediate level contains the erector spinae, which is a group of 3 muscles: the spinal, longissimus, and the iliocostalis. I'm not great at saying some of these muscle names, so I probably butchered those, and I'll probably butcher more of them. But these are the most common back muscles that you'll see. When you look at someone's back and you go just lateral to the spine, that big muscle mass that runs from the neck to the hips, that's your erector spinae. In the deep level, we have the semispinalis, the multifidus, and the rotators. The multifidus is a very common muscle to talk about when referring to therapy for the core. Now the multifidus is a triangle-shaped muscle that runs up and down the spine, but it's thickest down the lumbar or the low back. So for the multifidus, if you go in a stagger stance, so I have my right leg forward, I have my left hand up, and then my right hand is going to be my right lower back. If you go up and down with your left arm, you can feel the multifidus activating on your right side. You should also be able to feel it opposite on the left side. And this is a quick assessment to see side-to-side differences if you have any. Make sure to check out the 2nd video for all the other assessments. Your rotators are most common in your thoracic spine, which is the middle of your back. And this makes sense because this part of the spine has the most motion. In our deepest group, we have levator costarum, which help elevate the ribs so you can breathe, the interspinalis, which may also be absent in your thoracic spine, and the intertransverses, which run between the transverse process. So we just touched on over 20 different core muscles. Now the spine needs a lot of flexibility in order for us to move up and down, but we need it to be very stable so it can handle heavy loads. Just like the resistance band from the very beginning, a resistance band is very floppy, but when you stabilize it, it can handle a lot more. Your spine is just like that resistance band. And if we have any weak links, that load is going to migrate to that weak link and could cause injury, which is why it's so important to make sure you have a well-developed and balanced core. I hope you liked this video and found it very useful, not only what is a core, but why we need to strengthen it. Make sure to stick around for the rest of the series so you can learn A, what you need to strengthen, and many different ways to strengthen it. I'll see you on the next one.